What's going on, everybody? My name is TrendKiLL and I am back. You can't get rid of me that easily. I've been sick for the last couple of weeks, however, I am feeling better now. My voice is still playing catch up a little bit, so I may sound a little nasally, but that doesn't matter. It's time for Know Your Enemy. As always in these videos, if you haven't seen this series before, make sure you check out my Neath guide. That's going to explain what this series is going to be about. Also, if you're new to the game and you're trying to learn more than just how to play against certain gods, go check out my beginner's guides. Those are going to show you basic core mechanics and teach you some things that I might say in this series that you might not know otherwise. Outside of that, if you're ready to get started, let's go ahead and jump into the video. Today, we're going to be talking about Artemis, the goddess of the hunt. Alright, so as always, the first thing we're going to do is take a look at a visual representation of what Artemis is good at. You can see she has no healing, no real defense to speak of, very little utility. She's kind of in the middle of the pack on mobility. Her damage is decent and her control is decent. Now, her mobility is a bit questionable. She doesn't have a dash or a jump. She does have a speed steroid, which we'll talk about here in a second. So her mobility on this graph may be a little high due to the fact that she doesn't have any form of real escape. So let's take a look at her abilities, which will explain a little bit about why the graph looks like it does. First off, let's take a look at her passive called Still Target. This is not one of those passives that's going to intertwine itself through her kit. It's just a bonus critical strike chance. Now, how it works, she gets a bonus 5% critical strike chance for every successful auto attack up to 3 auto attacks. So she maxes out at 15% bonus critical strike chance. Early on, this matters a lot more than it's going to matter late game, because late game she's going to be building items that give her critical strike chance anyway, but early on she's going to be the only hunter that's going to be critting before she starts building her 4th or 5th item. So if Lady Luck is on her side, she may get several crits in a row early game, which is going to greatly increase her DPS output. Her first ability is called Transgressors Fate, and essentially Artemis places a trap of vines on the ground. If an enemy walks into that trap, they will be crippled and rooted for 2 seconds, also taking a very small amount of damage. She can also have 3 traps out at a time, and we'll talk about how she can use these traps to her advantage when we get to the mechanics section. Her second ability is called Vengeful Assault, and this is an attack speed and a movement speed buff. Now, without going through and double checking every single god that has an attack speed buff, I'm going to go ahead and say that Artemis's 75% attack speed buff is the highest in the game. Now, in addition to having 75% additional attack speed, Artemis also gains 20% movement speed. This is what adds a little bit to that mobility graph that we saw previously, and it's exactly why I said her mobility on that graph might be a little high, because this isn't a jump or a dash or a teleport. It just makes her a bit faster so she can get away. Her third ability is called Suppress the Insolent. This is essentially a volley of arrows that Artemis fires in a small ground-targeted AoE. The big thing to remember about this ability is that it also slows you for 25% for 2 seconds when you're hit by it. And her last ability, her ultimate Caledonian Boar, otherwise known as Tusky. This is a very interesting ability. Now, assuming you've read these descriptions, you kind of understand how Caledonian Boar works. Essentially, Artemis summons Tusky, who then charges, damages, and stuns the closest enemy to him. If another enemy is within range, he will then charge to that enemy, damaging and stunning that enemy. He will continue to do this until there's no other enemies in range, the duration on the ability expires, or someone kills him. Now, here's a couple highlights on this ability. First thing, understand that Tusky is completely immune to damage until he charges and hits the first enemy. After that, he can be attacked and killed like any other enemy in the game. Another thing to understand is that when Artemis uses this ability, she is immune to crowd control for 3 seconds. So let's move on to the mechanics section and see what happens when Artemis puts all these abilities together. Alright, so in the mechanics section, we're going to talk about some things that you need to watch out for as you're playing against an Artemis. The good news is that Artemis is pretty straightforward, and most of the things you need to watch out for should be fairly obvious. The bad news is that does not make for a very good guide, so this episode is probably going to be shorter than most. So first off, let's go ahead and jump into Transgressors Fate. Now, this is Artemis's trap, and again, this is where she's going to get a lot of her control. The bad news is, if you get caught in this trap and there's somebody around to take advantage of it, it can be absolutely devastating. The good news is it is 1, easy to avoid, and 2, hard for Artemis to use actively. What I mean by actively is that during a fight, especially if you're prepared for her to try to trap you, it is hard for Artemis to place Transgressors Fate underneath you as a form of crowd control. So make sure you're watching out for the traps on the ground. You don't accidentally want to step into one. That's not going to end well for you. Now, if you remember during the abilities section, we talked about the fact that Artemis can have 3 traps down at once. What this allows her to do is keep 2 traps down behind her in between the jungle and the lane, so that the jungler, if he wants to come through that path, is going to have to jump over and either waste their escape move to initiate or get stuck in a trap, take some damage, and alert the lane that they're there. Now, it takes 2 traps to fill the path between the lane and the jungle, so that leaves 1 trap for Artemis to be able to use actively to try to trap you during a fight. And one last tip on Transgressors Fate, do not walk too closely to the vines because they will pull you into it. The hitbox on getting stuck in the vines is much larger than you might think. So if you're trying to squeeze between a wall and a vine, there's a very good chance that you're going to hit the edge of that hitbox and be sucked right into the center of that vine and be rooted and crippled for 2 seconds. So be very careful trying to edge past one of those traps. Now, as far as her second ability, Vengeful Assault, is concerned, there's not much to say about this ability. Again, this gives her movement speed, allows her to get away, but other than that, you hit the 2, Artemis goes pew pew. Yeah, I like that. Trademark, bitch. The only thing I can say about Vengeful Assault is that remember that she can catch up to you or get away from you with that 20% speed boost, and just like Mercury, a 75% attack speed boost means that she is an objective killer. Artemis can take down towers and Gold Fury and Fire Giant very quickly. Now, on the flip side of that, Artemis is not going to be one of those gods that is capable of split pushing like crazy, like an Apollo or a Mercury, who can split push until their heart's content and then get out fairly easy using their ultimate. Her third ability, Suppress the Insolent, this is her poke ability. This is her clear ability, and this makes Artemis both strong and weak early game. She's strong because she can poke the absolute living crap out of you. Not only does it do a decent amount of damage early, but it also slows you for 25% at all ranks. So this ability can be very annoying early game. However, without setting up the wave and without pretty good aim, it is hard for Artemis to clear a wave. Now, lucky for her, she gets the bonus crit, which will help her do a little bit more damage, but she's not going to be like Neith or Anhur or Apollo, one of those gods who has an ability that can clear a wave instantly with no setup. This ability also allows Artemis to be super annoying. With the slow from Suppress the Insolent, the speed boost that she gets from Vengeful Assault, and the trap should she happen to hit you in it, plus the stun from Caledonian Boar, she can stay on top of you for so long. Now, the good news about all of this is that all of her abilities take a ton of mana, and without mana conservation, Artemis will run out of mana very quickly. Another thing about her using her entire kit trying to kill you is that she is 100% vulnerable at that point. Again, she's got a speed boost that's on a 14-second minimum cooldown and a stun that's on a 90-second cooldown. Other than that, if you happen to dodge traps that she's laying trying to get away from you, if she has the mana to do that, you're going to kill her. And last but not least, let's talk about Tusky, the old Caledonian Boar, Artemis's ultimate. This ability can be absolutely terrifying in a 1v1 scenario, a small teamfight scenario, a full-on 5v5 teamfight scenario. Tusky can absolutely change the tide of the battle. First off, let's talk about one of the oldest Artemis tips in the book, using Tusky during a fight to stun someone and dropping Transgressors Fate right underneath that person. Without some sort of cleanse like purification beads, that keeps someone locked in place for 3 to 4 seconds. This allows Artemis to unload on somebody, and especially in a team fight, that one person is almost guaranteed to die. The next tip I'm going to give you is a little bit deceiving. It's actually kind of tricky the way this works. First off, Tusky has a fairly large range. Now remember, the person in that range will be charged, stunned, and damaged, and if someone else is in range, Tusky will then chain to that next person. However, the distance of the chain stems from the last stunned target, not from Artemis. So Tusky could technically charge all the way down a lane, stunning people on his way. So if you have no business in the fight, you've got to be very careful how close you are to the person that gets stunned by Tusky originally, or you may find yourself stunned with a Transgressor's Fate going underneath you as well. So you've got to be extremely careful around an Artemis who's got Tusky on the board, because his stun range is extremely deceiving. Now for another tip, if Tusky does not have someone in range, he will just kind of float around attacking minions. However, if someone at any time is to walk into that range, Tusky will then attack that person. On the same token, if Tusky is walking towards a minion, and by him walking towards a minion walks into range of someone, he will then charge that person. So again, you've got to be very careful in finding out what Tusky is going to be doing before you get anywhere near him, if the stun may kill you. And last but not least, just like any other pet, Tusky can tank towers. Now, it's rare that you're going to see an Artemis use Caledonian Boar to try to tank a tower, but it can be done. So don't expect your tower to save you if Artemis should decide that she wants to tower dive you. Tusky may just be enough to tank that tower and get the kill. So that's gonna do it for the episode, guys. Hopefully you learned something about Artemis today. I hope this video was easy to understand, and I hope to see you come back next week when we're gonna be talking about Sylvanas, the Keeper of the Wild.